Standing orders. Standing orders. While some may have some concept of what that term might actually mean, every soldier who has ever raised his right hand and taken an oath in a MEP station to deploy to basic combat training knows that there are actually 11 general standing orders common to every military service. And before leaving Fort Living Room, a military recruiter will probably strongly encourage you to commit to memory at least just 3. Number 1, I will guard everything within the limits of my post and will not quit my post until properly relieved. 2, I will obey my special orders and perform all of my duties in a military manner. And 3, I will report violations of my special orders, emergencies, and anything not covered in my instructions to the commander of the relief. But in the law, the term standing has an entirely different meaning and represents those jurisprudential rules that permit a person to bring a complaint in a civil court of law in redress for some actual and direct injury for which that court has the power to grant relief. Basically, under the law, if you don't have an injury or if your injury is not quantifiable, a court has every right and power to dismiss your case. And welcome to Fort Benning, Georgia, the home of the infantry, often referred to as the Benning School for Boys. My name is Major Mike Webb, and for the next few minutes, I'd like to discuss, as a retired field-grade military officer, withstanding, therefore, to bring a legal claim with regards to my very first military duty installation, the now controversial military installation bordering Victory Drive and Columbus, Georgia, because it is alleged that Brigadier General Henry L. Benning was an officer in the Army of Northern Virginia and a commander for the Army of the Confederacy. And that because of this historical fact, as an African American, our Black Lives Matter progressives have taken it upon themselves to redress my alleged injuries in what can only be described as patriarchal pretensions of piety. So we have established that I meet the minimal sufficiency for standing to state a claim regarding Fort Benning, Georgia. And I am not just any old citizen with a gripe on social media or an angry person with an opinion, for I actually have what attorneys would call in a courtroom privity of contract, having actually signed a legal contract to serve in the military forces of these United States. I actually raised my right hand in a MEP station to take a solemn oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, trying to be all that I could be in an army that didn't ask for experience but gave it. And in fact began my enlistment process on the very day after Iraqi tanks rolled into the sovereign nation of Kuwait. And before I even arrived at Fort Benning, I was assigned to a drill instructor unit where before departing Fort Georgia, I had to memorize those standing general orders, one of which, you recall, was to guard everything within the limits of my post and not quit until properly relieved. And believe it or not, when you simply enlist, like I did for the first Iraqi war, when your contract is over, just like Forrest Gump, you can simply walk away with your discharge papers. But somehow along the way, I accepted a military commission. And until I resign, under the terms of that commission, even in retirement, I am obligated for life to uphold that same solemn oath that our forefathers took. And of course, being black, I actually have ancestors as close to my father's grandfather who were actually emancipated slaves. But we'll get back to that a little bit later. Now, just for a few facts. Now, a few years ago, the National Defense PAC conducted some research and determined that less than 25% less than 25% of age-eligible Americans between the ages of 18 and 34 are even eligible to begin a military service contract. So in a court of law, under rules of standing, that pretty much would silence over 3/4 of us on this issue of changing the names of military installations, disqualified for reasons of criminal record, academics, and physical fitness, which are some pretty important areas of life for success anywhere. And so it might behoove some of us to major in the majors and concentrate on those issues that will actually accrue to our personal benefit and success. And you would if you were a rational person that wanted to get ahead. But the Bipartisan Policy Institute, in its annual review of military personnel policies and retention, actually made some concerning findings a few years ago about the ability of our military to, as Army Command Sergeant Major Daniel Daly says, fight and win our wars when asked to do so. Yes, worse than the fact that if we ever return to a draft, only less than 1/4 of us could perform that essential service. Less than 1% of those are even inclined to do so. Less than 1% of less than 1/4 of us, able and capable, are actually so motivated about what the American way of life is and defending our rights that we are willing to sign a contract, put on a uniform, go to war. Which is not the feeling that you get when you look at the throngs of persons out in the street knocking down statues, wearing bandanas, and screaming about standing up for justice. Yes, indeed, standing up for justice. And former Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta, a veteran himself, who these days is spending his time joining juntas of former senior Defense Department officials to tell the Commander-in-Chief how to do his job, was a part of that panel at the Bipartisan Policy Institute a few years ago, and he could probably tell you better than anyone that of that less than 1%, from the less than 25% of us who have what it takes to sign up and be all you can be, the ones most likely to sign up for a military tour, or even better, continue on for a career, tend to be legacies with a father or mother or uncle or aunt who signed up for military service before them and inspired them to continue a family tradition of patriotism, duty, and honor, and adventure. It is true in life that most of us don't defy our environment and upbringing, which we actually try to do in the military, jumping out of perfectly good airplanes and other things. And few of us venture beyond our zones of comfort. But that would also suggest that if you are espousing views of the military and what it should do, and have not ever served yourself, more likely than not, you are like that student who arrives in a classroom without taking the due diligence to complete their homework and read the book, but yet expect to pass the course, which in a Darwinian natural selection really works out in nature, if nature is the one God that you recognize, which would also tend to make you distinguishable from soldiers, Marines, airmen, and sailors, those boys and girls with whom I served, because exceeding every other demographic, the members of the military also tend to be those in our nation who are most devoted to faith in God. But the most intriguing fact at a time when folks are tearing down Confederate monuments and calling for changes of names on military installations, most of the names we probably have to look up to find out if they are associated with Confederate generals or memories, requires a bit of a broader perspective, especially looking at the demographics of the men and women who stand ready, willing and able to fight tonight in a real war, where much more than tear gas will be thrown at you. at risk of life and limb and in sacrificial separation from family and friends, enduring hardships for this nation. A population that has, since I first raised my hand and took a solemn oath to God, has declined from just above 2 million to about 1.3 million today. The military, which not only led the nation in advancing integration, providing opportunities for folks like my father's Uncle Fletcher to serve in the First World War under General Blackjack Pershing as a lieutenant, but also found soldiers supporting the cause for civil rights as the 101st Airborne was placed on orders by General Dwight D. Eisenhower to defy Governor Orville Faubus in Arkansas as he stood in the doors of a schoolhouse to block access to education for colored people. And the National Guards, like the one in which my father served during the riots in cities like Newark after the assassination of my father's friend Reverend King, has grown increasingly more diverse even in that short time, increasing from 36% back when the wall came down in the Soviet Union to 43% in minority representation today, according to a study prepared by the Pew Research Foundation in 2019. And the surprising fact, perhaps for some, goes back to that idea of the military being a family business, but in which more frequently in the past few decades has found parents and family far more likely than not to recommend that their children find careers in some other business, considering the increased op-tempo as our nation's forces have been compelled to respond to a widening range of problems around the world in the global war against terror, humanitarian support missions, and other missions above and beyond their conventional warfare mission, and quite often by members of Congress who never even served in the military. Stay at home, they say, and be safe, and let someone else worry about what has been our family business as sentinels for this nation. If you like watching action movies, you have to admit that this is some pretty cool stuff, or hula stuff, as I learned to say while serving in the infantry and in special operations myself. But one fact that you might only know if you actually did some of this cool stuff yourself, or did some research and due diligence before saying what you feel about the military, because you don't know the hometowns of these brave boys and girls, men and women, soldiers. Like I learned, not just serving with soldiers, but also in preparation each year as a basic training company commander in the Army Reserve. And you would not necessarily detect the distinct accents of the brave men and women who keep us safe from harm's way on fields of battle far away. But they are doing the jobs as our nation's sentinels as they have done for years. And perhaps it is far better to understand why even the soldiers who fought the bitterest battles in the wars between the states continue to meet for reunions, to share memories together, North and South, and apparently even black and white, was because they came from families separated by wars. And today most of those soldiers are following in the footsteps of those soldiers who fought those battles before them, but not for the Union, but for what we today most often call a lost cause. Yes, by region, most of the families who today send our soldiers to fight and die to be buried in fields of honor are not the sons of the North and emancipation and everything that we say that stood for, but the sons and the daughters of the Confederacy. The legacies of the names many are trying to remove from military installations, and whose memories they are taking away, ripping down from memorials and statues on claim that slavery was their unredeemable sin, for which they only were culpable, engaged in battles against more industrialized Union that yet had on its side a total of 5 slave states, including West Virginia, which seceded from Virginia to remain a slave state, and whose slaves were not freed until the ratification and adoption of the 13th Amendment in December, not June 1865, our new holiday. But in an identity politic, where the cry of the day is, "I can't breathe," and Black Lives Matter, let me as a black man, although I prefer as an American, with a family history of service in the military, great-grandfather who was an emancipated slave, and a father who served as the first African-American state chaplain for the New Jersey National Guard, integrating the officer corps even when he got in. Tell you a story about my connection to a military installation in western Georgia, where I had the chance to take a 5-minute trip aboard various airborne platforms departing Libby Army Airfield to parachute into a field across the state border in Alabama on fire and drop zone. A military installation that found its first African-American commander, Major General Gary Brito, back in March 2018. Despite a military family tradition, the only thing that I knew about Fort Benning, Georgia, the first time that I arrived, was that it was the home of the Army Infantry, the Queen of Battle, and quite a ways from Atlanta. And I doubt that if I knew that General Benning was a brigadier general in the Confederate Army, it would have necessarily created any obstacle nor any reservation about going to join the military, because my focus was not on a name of a place, something as silly as that, but rather on the opportunity it afforded for service to country at a critical time, and with the bonus of adventure. Getting away from the routine of working in a bank, wearing a business suit like I ended up doing after college, I could not have imagined the experience I would find rolling in red Georgia mud, drinking rainwater, doing other high-speed, low-drag things. But probably the last thing that I would have expected would be to have a cousin of John Cougar Mellencamp in my basic training company on Sand Hill, 1st of the 38th, the Rock of the Morning. Nor to find my best friends in a gangbanger from Detroit, a skinhead from St. Louis, and a guy from the real-life town from which Mayberry received its name. And idea. And maybe the apprehension of preparation for war changes our priorities, because those were my bunkmates in military barracks and the guys who would accompany me to chapel on Sundays, if only to have a short vacation from drill sergeants and basic training stress. Have a chance to get some cookies with people that smiled. Just kind of a nice thing when you're in basic training. So the name Fort Benning sounds more of a good memory of mine that folks want to remove and erase for the benefit of people who look like me. And in a 20-year career, I would find myself back on Fort Benning in the Chattahoochee County on two more occasions after graduation from basic training and receiving the coveted blue cord of an infantryman. I would return later for officer candidate school and pin on my butter bar and have a chance to see my father beaming so proud and attired in his old Army khakis, a uniform that had long been discarded by the Army, but he sat so proudly there in a folding chair as a colonel amongst the VIPs. But my best story and memory of an Army installation with an allegedly offensive name that is claimed to have been a symbol of oppression and an obstacle to my progress was actually on my second trip to the Benning School for Boys, sandwiched between basic training and OCS, as I returned to do the only thing that I ever actually planned to do in the Army by attending the Army Parachutist School. Jump out of a plane. A slight contractual problem required me to continue on from jump school to the Ranger Indoctrination Program, or RIP, which would require me to go on further to assignment in a Ranger Battalion, where the average age soldier was only 19. And by that time in my life, I was already 26. So the furthest thing from my mind, or even my recruiters, was that I was actually going to be an airborne ranger. The deal was, he got his numbers and I got my jump school. That was it. That was the extent of the deal. That was as far as I thought I was willing or able to go. And a lot about how that story turned out speaks volumes about that commercial that they used to say, be all you can be, and that we don't ask for experience. But my biggest concern about RIP was not the course itself as much as the combat water survival swimming test that was scheduled for the first day of the course. Had I known that you could just quit, perhaps things might have turned out differently, but I did not have that knowledge. And so while I was perfectly willing to go on and fail valiantly in the Ranger Regiment preparation course, the potential for drowning would have presented significant complications in my career objectives. And what happened on Fort Benning says a lot about the opportunities that an allegedly offensive name did not prevent. I knew that I had 3 weeks to prepare and did not wait until the last minute to try to create a solution. Nope. On the first day of arrival, I headed down to main post, located the swimming pool, found a Red Cross instructor, and requested a tutor to pass the test. And on that Southern military installation, bearing the name of a Confederate brigadier general, a woman with a Southern accent, with skin a very different color than mine, agreed to become my private tutor in the main post installation pool, which I would have every day for a half hour each day after training, doing the jump school thing for 3 weeks, all to myself to prepare to pass a swimming test. And I don't know any other place in the world where that might happen besides the United States military. And that is my fondest memory of a place called Fort Benning, way down yonder on the Chattahoochee. Never knew how much that muddy water meant to me, but I learned how to swim and I learned how to love. A lot about living and a little about love. My name is Major Mike Webb, and I am running for U.S. Congress with liberty, honor, and excellence. By God, we shall make America great again. Honest. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.